All right, guys. So Mr. Care here, of course. So basically, I mentioned that I was going to help you on Wednesday by putting a little introduction video. I went over it a little bit in class, but I'd like to clarify what I meant. I think that this skill is super useful. So let's kind of look at our DBQ and kind of come up with a game plan. Of course, the choices you pick will be different than mine. I suggest you don't use the choices I made because then you have to think outside of the box a little bit. But we're going to start by sharing my screen. But hopefully this records properly. Excellent. So here we have your DBQ. Okay, I'll move this junk out of the way. So, I mean, I'm not going to read the directions to you. You already obviously can read them yourselves, your honors students. But let's get the top bullet points. The first one, it says it has to have a relevant thesis and supports that thesis with evidence. Now, a thesis is just going to be the theme. It's what you're not introducing, right? We're not announcing this. The audience, myself, already knows the topic. So what you're doing here is your thesis is going to kind of be your introduction paragraph and the general feeling and gist and what you're supporting with evidence throughout the entirety of the paper. The next one says cites evidence from included source perspectives. That means just use the sources in the documents. It says, and analyzes the document by grouping them in as many appropriate ways as possible, right? Does not simply summarize the documents individually. That means there can be crossover. So if document 1 and document 4 kind of have the same facts that support your claim, you can mix them together. And what I mean by that is you don't have to have in document 1 and then that document 1 is your entire first paragraph. It is okay if your first paragraph is making a particular point to pull in the other documents to further strengthen that argument. And I'm going to explain that as we go on. But don't be afraid to be using as many documents as you can if they support what is being said in that first paragraph or second paragraph or third paragraph. So it says historical context. I'm not going to read that part. You guys can obviously do that on your own. And it says, sorry, I missed a bullet point, and it says takes into account both the sources of the document and the author's point of view. So remember, even the documents that we're using for sources, they still are having some degree of bias, or they're still putting forth a point of view. So be able to kind of analyze for tone. You can analyze for tone by looking at vocabulary, grammatical usage, and the way they display facts. I mean, facts can be twisted in such a way so that they seem less credible or more credible. So be careful when you're looking at facts. You're thinking about the tone that the facts are said in. So the question is quite simple. What were the primary reasons for the fall of Rome? So obviously it says reasons. So one of the things we need to look out for is having more than one, right? Duh, it's a 5-paragraph essay. I cannot talk. So let's look at these documents one by one. So document 1 is a chart compiled from various sources of the Roman emperors, right? So we have a list of all these different emperors, and actually, if we look at them, none of them we've talked about yet. But remember, that's not relevant, right? If you knew supplementary information on these emperors, then you could do that. Even, for example, if we look at somebody, let's look at Quintilius, 270, right? That's only a year. Now, if you want to research and get additional info on his reign, you're more than welcome to do that. But that's not entirely necessary, right? Because just by looking here at the reigns, we have a better idea of kind of the basic problem here. Not to mention, if we look at the, what did I do? Oh, the cause of death. If we look at Valerian and Gallienus, died as a slave of Persians and then assassination. So, I mean, an emperor as a slave is already kind of throwing red flags about the question, why did Rome fall? Right? So you don't even need to know the exact information about these rulers, right? And obviously, they give you a hint. I gave you a hint over here. What message might these frequent and violent changes in leadership might have sent to the people of the Roman Empire? So that's giving you a tip of where you can go in that direction, right? Document 2, an excerpt from the handbook concerning military matters, right, by a Roman historian. Now, once again, these are the subtle things that we need to be looking for. If we look at the dates, right, from 235 to 283. So that, or sorry, 285. So that is kind of the time frame that they're talking about. But if we look down, we notice it is 450 CE. So the first thing we should be thinking about is this a reliable narrator? We can't be entirely sure, but that hundreds of years gap, there's going to be some bias or historical changes in there. So it's something to be aware of, right? And it's a way we can kind of go into the reading with a degree of investigation. I guess that's the word I want to use. So once again, we can read this, right? I'll leave that to you. But basically, how did the change in breastplates and helmets contribute to the decline of the Roman Empire? Now, let's be real. Obviously, technology plays a big part, but are they talking about the breastplates and the helmets actually being the cause of the whole fall? Probably not. But could you make the argument that this armor and the lack of training or preparation could be directly related to document 1 and the lack of consistent rulers? You could totally make that argument. So even if you didn't want to use document 2 as one of your primary sources, you can pull that into document 1 if you want, right? And that's what I mentioned earlier. Using as many documents as you can to support your claim. And of course, some documents will go contrary to your claim. So what should you do? Probably ignore it or mention it just briefly. Let's move to document 3. This is published in 1982, so this is a modern historian. That doesn't mean that he's more or less accurate than the other historian, but something to keep in mind. This historian is looking at it with a more modern perspective. I'll let you read that. In what ways could the failure to enforce conscription weaken Rome, right? Once again, if you wanted to look at the group of people who are able to escape it, does that show a lack of discipline? Does that show a lack of military preparation? Does that show a lack of enforcement due to inconsistent rulers, right? If you wanted to use document 2, and talk about the lack of military preparation as the fall of Rome, well, document 3 builds into that. So once again, once you find your primary paragraphs or documents that you want to use, right? For example, maybe document 1 is my first body paragraph. I should be looking around for other documents that aren't my second and third body paragraph, but also complement it, right? Think of it as, you can have a hamburger, right? But some people would rather have a hamburger with cheese, so a cheeseburger. Wow, I don't know why I said that. Or some people would rather have onions on it or lettuce. All these little documents that you're adding are adding layers to your hamburger, if that makes sense. I'm really hungry, so I'm going with food for the minute. All right, if we go down to document 4, right? Now, document 4 is actually a great document to use, even though it gives you very few written things to source, right? This, for example, if you cite document 4, you can look at particular things like the time frame, 400 years. Pretty big deal. Do those 400 years coincide with these years? They certainly do, right? Do these invasions coincide with like the lack of soldiers through conscription? Yep. Does it coincide with lack of military preparation? Yep. So this is a great source. It might be more difficult to type about because you have to make your own I don't want to say assumptions, but your own interpretations of what the data represents. So one source that I think is very useful, it can basically further strengthen any of your points. So even if you don't want to use this map, you could use this to supplement your body paragraphs. So don't be afraid to explain migration routes. For example, where's this pointer? There we are. I mean, even if you want to describe the fact that the Huns have a capital. So they're a migrating group from Central Asia who managed to be successful enough to get a capital. Might say something about how successful they were or how weak Rome was. Something to think about. Once again, this is great to tie into any of your body paragraphs, or even using it as a body paragraph and using document 2 and 3 to reinforce that. If you look at document 5, excerpt about an Asian tribe called the Huns from Roman history by the Roman historian Amani, forget it, that guy. 380 CE. Once again, dates are important. This is 100 years or so after the last emperor on the list. It's also in this time frame. So once again, this can be tied in. And it says, what makes the Huns a formidable force for the Roman Empire? Now, remember, Huns can be formidable, but you look more formidable you look more formidable if you are fighting against a weaker opponent. It would be like, I don't know, if the Lakers came to play our basketball team at the high school, right? I mean, the Lakers are obviously really good, but are they going to look way better than us? Yeah, of course they are, because the opposition isn't as good. No offense to anybody who plays basketball, but I think you can all get where I'm going with that. So also things to remember, tone and language. If you look at the very first line, the Huns exceed any definition of savagery. They have compact, sturdy limbs and thick necks. Although they have the shape of human beings, they are so wild in their way of life that they have no need of fire or pleasant tasting foods. So let's just say this guy might, I don't want to say racist because it does sound that way, but he considers them as barbarians. So you got to remember his tone. And it's all right to critique his tone. You could say that something along the lines of, he's making them seem animalistic or savage, but the reality is that Rome was so incompetent that they could be, their civilization could be destroyed by a group of nomadic people. So once again, this can tie into lack of leadership. You can tie it into the maps. There's lots of information that can be tied in here. An excerpt written by Priscus, Roman ambassador to the Huns. So once again, you could tie this into document 5, because document 5 is about the Huns. Document 4 is about their invasion maps. And even document 1, he's an ambassador to the Huns. What does that say about how Rome recognizes these nomadic people, right? If you have to have an ambassador to a group that like kind of sacks you and destroys you, that shows a different power dynamic. Some Romans embrace Hun occupation. How does this document help explain causes of Rome's fall? Once again, we talked about lack of conscription, people not wanting to fight for the Roman Empire. Could that tie into why people like the Huns more? It certainly can. The history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Once again, written not in modern times, but modern-ish. And it talks about natural disasters that strike Rome. So once again, you could use this as kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. So you could have body paragraph 1 be one reason, body paragraph 2, and then body paragraph 3 was, on top of everything else, earthquake. So once again, everything can be tied in here, and there's a lot of sources to use. This last one, very, very modern. We have deadly illness. You could connect this with document 7. You could say earthquake, illness, and invasions, right? And then you can, you know, if you say invasions, you can use document 1 to say, look how many leaders they had. This is why the invasions happened the way they did. So there's tons and tons of ways that this can be tied in together. And that's all of it. So that's a brief overview. What I would suggest you do is decide what documents you're going to use as your 3 body paragraphs. Then I would do something like make a word web, for example. Oh man, nope. Where do I have a paint program? Oh man. Oh boy. Yeah, I guess. Oh, paintbrush. Okay, that's fine. So, for example, if I was going to use document 1, right, which talks about how many rulers they've had over such a amount of time, maybe I want to use the map. So what I'm going to do is do like web. This is how I do it. You can do it any way you want. 4, and then I would type in this. The map shows that ineffective leaders were able to be enticing to migrant groups who wanted to sack, and right, I could use that. I could also use what was the illness document? Sorry, document 8. So I could use document 8. And I could say the illness was so bad in Rome because leaders were not effective, okay? And this could just be my first body paragraph, but I've already tied in other sources. So that's my suggestion. You don't have to do it this way, but I hope this video kind of gave you ways that you could tie things together. Feel free to ask any questions. You have until Sunday to get it done, so don't be afraid to shoot me an email between now and Friday. Over the weekend, I'm not going to look at my computer. Sorry, I just have way too many emails. But this is a suggestion. I really hope it helped. And I guess that is all for me. All right, guys, have a great Wednesday. I hope this was useful in some way.